Alright, this is going to be a weird little tutorial about how to make this textured ball in Photoshop with a mouse without using any internet textures. It's pretty janky, but whatever. So, I start by drawing in a random background for my stucco color. And then I add just some, with a random brush and a light opacity, just a little bit of variation to the surface. Decided that super dark bit was probably too aggressive, and then, you know, basically just kept trying to add a little bit of variation. I then drew in the rough outline of my paint, keeping in mind that this is an example texture, not a good example of what chipping paint looks like, because it's pretty gosh darn janky. And then I, in a few areas, went and tried to eat away at some of the edges so they weren't super round and crazy looking, and again, I'm just doing this with one of the sort of, more jagged brushes, and I drew some weird little spikes going into it as someone, I don't know, like took a knife and slashed at the wall like a crazy person, except it looks really janky because I'm not using a tablet or pen pressure or anything like that. I saved out my image file, and then I just plopped it onto my sphere to see what it looked like, and kind of rotated the sphere a little bit because I wasn't super happy with the positioning. For this, I'm just using, basically this is like a practice texture, so I'm not doing a lot to specifically map onto areas of the circle. I also realized this was supposed to be paint on metal, not paint on stucco, so I just randomly did a black and white filter on my stucco to make it gray. Huzzah! Once that was done, I started adding in a little bit of rust detail because I realized I forgot to do that the first time because I'm a goober. And again, I'm just using the same sort of generic, like, speckly brush and kind of going and trying to make the shapes a little bit irregular, eating into stuff, and I knew that the area that was where I'm adding the rust now was the one that was going to be shown in Maya on the specific render, so I'm not adding a lot of rust where it's not going to be seen, because I figured kind of why waste the time doing that. So for this, I've added the color, and now I'm going to work in and start playing a little bit with some different maps. So basically I just grayscaled this entire thing, and you'll notice that all of my details are on different materials, are on different layers, so that it's very easy to come back in and modify only the paint, or only the background, or only the rust. And that's the workflow that I use a lot when I'm doing textures, specifically in Photoshop. It just makes things a little bit easier when I'm trying to mess with stuff, so I'm just going in here and again, just trying to adjust the levels based on whatever I want them to be. And for this, I'm making a bump map where the paint is going to be the highest, most raised area. The rust is going to be mostly recessed, but kind of just sort of doing its own thing, and then the background is 50% gray, slightly mottled. In here, I'm going in and adding some little, like, rivet areas, which I decided there were too many, and I didn't want to make all them cough, so I just added some on the corners, and I'm doing, like, little, metal plates, basically, on the side. Now I am going to go back in and add some modification layers onto these. For the little rivets, I'm going to add an inner glow on those just to try to make them a little bit more rounded looking. It's a bump map, they're going to look pretty janky anyway, but just so they're not like super aggressive hard circles, I found that the inner glow is a good way to do that. And I'm trying to do a little bit of the same thing on the metal plates, as if the sides are a little bit like weathered and sort of moved around, or what am I saying, moved around, slightly rounded rather than just a super aggressive bump map line. I found that really hard aggressive bump map lines, like just direct black to white, tend to look pretty janky, so I try to, you know, round corners where possible. Here, I'm basically just going to go in and actually apply that bump map, because, you know, I want to see what it actually looks like. And in this case, I think it actually looks relatively decent. There's some janky areas on it, of course, because I'm doing this very quickly, but hopefully the general principles of doing this make sense. I'm also updating my color map so that the rest actually shows up. So basically, I'm going to do the exact same thing and just duplicate this again, and here I'm going to make my metalness map, because I do not want the rust to be super shiny, and I don't want the paint to be super shiny, because neither of those things make sense. Otherwise, process is exactly the same. Except for this, I'm doing a just straight up black and white map. The rust I did leave a little bit of variation, just as some of the areas of rust were maybe a little bit thinner, so you're seeing through to the metal. But those I basically just color corrected aggressively to be what I wanted. And then here I'm going through and just trying to see maybe what values of roughness I might kind of want for some of the different other pieces of this. For the roughness map, it's again fairly straightforward. The paint itself is just a single color. The rust is going to be super rough, and then the metal is going to be the least rough. I found that those were the values that I, looked to me, the most reasonable. I also had to go through and tick alpha as luminance, and I realized that that metal was way too shiny for what I wanted, so I had to go in and just sort of twiddle a little bit with those values until it was a little bit closer to, whatever look I was going for. And to be fair, I had no real plan when I started this, so I didn't know what this was. Ideally, you'd be working from reference, and things would make a lot more sense that way in terms of, having something more to guide you than just, I think this looks kind of okay. And then here I'm just going through and adjusting my lighting. There wasn't really much else to do with this texture, so I just kind of wanted to brighten things up a little bit. And then I just sort of saved the lighting out, and I did a version of the less ideal lighting, where in this case you can't see the rust, so it's like, just harder to see the texture you've done. And then I undid that, and then this is basically just me reapplying all the texture maps so that I can render out each individual one, so the color map only, the roughness map only, and the bump map only, and also metalness, I guess. On different spheres, and I'm just kind of playing with the settings of either roughness or the color to allow the maps to be a little bit more obvious when I'm rendering it. I found that a lot of times like dark metal doesn't show up really well, etc, etc. So I'm just kind of like playing with my settings so that whatever map I'm rendering, shows up as optimally as possible. And that's basically it. That's really all I did for this. The rest is just me systematically rendering stuff out. So hopefully that was sort of useful and hopefully made sense.